Did you know that most freelance designers fail within their first 5 years of doing business? Keep listening to discover why this may be happening, and more importantly, what the majority of successful freelancers have in common. Hi, welcome back to another episode of Resourceful Designer, arguably the best source for advice and valuable resources on building a home-based design business. Or at least that's my opinion, and I do admit I may be a bit biased. I am your host, Mark Decote, and today I'm tackling a topic that, it might ruffle some feathers in the design space, but stick with me, because this could be the most important advice you'll hear if you're thinking about starting your own freelance design career. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you know that I don't like the term freelance or freelancer. And I'm not going to get into why, but if you want to know why I don't like those terms, go listen back to episode 17 of the podcast titled Being a Freelance Graphic Designer Could Hurt Your Business, to learn why I don't think we, as a general collective of designers, should be using the term freelance or freelancer. But for the purpose of this episode, I will use it because among designers, I find it acceptable. It's when it comes to clients I don't. But again, I don't want to get into that. So just know that for the rest of this episode, I will be referring to us as freelancers. It just makes it a lot easier. Now, I was looking at some statistics recently, and I was really surprised by what I saw. Studies show that between 70 to 90% of freelance graphic designers fail within their first 5 years. They either give up working for themselves and find a design job somewhere, or they leave the profession altogether. Now, I want to let that sink in for a moment. That staggering, as far as I'm concerned, statistic means that if you're getting into freelancing, the odds against you succeeding are pretty steep. Now, before you hit that pause button thinking to yourself, oh great, Mark's telling me not to follow my dreams. That's not at all what I'm saying. In fact, I'm going to show you how working for someone else first might actually be the fastest route to achieving those dreams of running your own successful design business. In the 10 years since I started Resourceful Designer, wow, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years already, but in that time, I've had hundreds of designers reach out to me for advice. Now, many of them were still in school, just finishing off, or were recent graduates, while others were switching from a career in a non-design related field, thinking that their creativity would lend well and that graphics or web design is the right path for them. And of course, some of them were veteran designers, tired of, quote unquote, working for the man. Now, more often than not, the questions that they were asking had to do with freelancing. These people see it as the ultimate expression to creative freedom and entrepreneurship. And hey, I get it, I really do. The allure of being your own boss, setting your own hours, and choosing what clients and what projects to take on, that's incredibly appealing. I love this life, and I couldn't imagine doing anything else. But I also know that not everyone is suited for this job, or maybe I should say at least not yet. But here's the thing, and I learned this from my own experience and from mentoring countless designers over the years. There's this hidden, call it a curriculum if you will, in this freelance design world that you can only really learn when you're working for somebody else. And you lose out if you don't. Would you expect a chef to open their own restaurant without ever working in somebody else's kitchen first? Probably not, right? You've got to learn the ropes. And I've seen this pattern among designers for years. Those who spend time in either a design agency or an in-house design department, they typically end up building stronger and more profitable design businesses later on. Now, what I want to do today is break down exactly why starting your career working for someone else isn't just settling and not following your dream. It's actually a strategic move. I want to look at the business skills you'll learn, the networks you'll build, and most importantly, how this experience can actually accelerate your path to successful freelancing. And this isn't just some theory I've come up with. I've seen this play out time and time again with members of my resourceful designer community, as well as other designers I've spoken with over the years. Those who took the time to learn the ropes in an agency or in an in-house design team, they often end up building more sustainable, more profitable freelance businesses than those who just jumped straight into freelancing without that experience. And by the way, before we dive into the nitty-gritty of this episode, I want to remind you that if you're finding value in this podcast, make sure you follow it wherever you're listening to your podcast so that you never miss an episode. And don't forget to share it with a fellow design friend so that we can all learn and grow together. And if you're ready to take your design business to the next level, head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/community to join a great group of like-minded designers who are looking to do the same thing. Now, let's get right into the meat of why working for someone else might be the best first step in your design career and how it can set you up for freelance success down the road. Do you know what the biggest challenge for most new freelancers is? It's not their design skills. It's not even finding clients. It's understanding the business of design. And that's exactly what working for someone else teaches you. Look at it this way. When you're in school or learning design online, you're focused on mastering your craft. It's all about color theory, typography, layout principles, all the creative stuff. And that's great. You need all that stuff to succeed as a designer. But nobody's teaching you how to handle a client who keeps changing their mind after you've already started a project, or how to write a proposal that actually gets accepted, or what to do when a client ghosts you after you've done half the work. We've all heard the stories if we haven't actually experienced them for ourselves. And you know what I've learned during my 15 years working at the print shop prior to starting my business? I learned that there's this whole hidden curriculum that design school doesn't teach you. I remember this one situation. This was early in my career when I was still new at the print shop. And I recall this client who was absolutely adamant about using their nephew's artwork in their corporate brochure. Now, I was obviously still green back then. I was new to the world after graduating. And I'm pretty sure if I had been freelancing on my own at the time, I might have just given in to the client just to keep them happy. But I watched the design department supervisor, who, it was kind of like a creative director, although we didn't use that title. I watched her handle this situation beautifully. She didn't just say no to the client. She explained the business implications of using their nephew's artwork. She showed them how it would affect their market positioning. And she actually turned it into an opportunity to upsell them on a corporate brand refresh. Not only did she convince the client it wasn't a good idea, she reframed the conversation and turned it into a higher priced brand refresh. Now, I used those same techniques that I learned from her years later to dissuade a client from adding a fish to his carpentry business logo. You may remember me telling that story on a past episode of the podcast. Now, that was over 30 years ago, and yet I remember that conversation with that client vividly to this day. And that's the kind of experience you can't get from watching YouTube tutorials or taking online courses. You need to be in the room when these sort of conversations happen. You need to see how experienced professionals handle these situations. Another reason to work for someone else first is that when you're working for someone else, you get to make mistakes on someone else's dime. And trust me, we all make mistakes, especially early on in our careers. And when you're freelancing, those mistakes come directly out of your pocket and could cost you a lot of money. But when you're employed, you have a kind of safety net. You have mentors and coworkers who can catch those mistakes before they become disasters. There are so many valuable lessons you can learn by working for someone else. And I'm not the only one who believes this. I've seen this play out countless times throughout the design community. People who spend time working for agencies or in-house design teams often tell me how that experience became their foundation for successful freelancing. They learned how to scope projects properly. They learned how to price their services, how to manage client expectations, all while getting paid to learn. Let me give you a quick example. Jeremy, a member of the resourceful designer community, works at a renowned university in the USA. He joined the community because he'd grown, tired of his daily routine, and he wanted help becoming his own boss. Now, with a little bit of guidance from myself and others in the community, his years of knowledge dealing with school bureaucracy and how to handle project requests helped him land a $10,000 web design project as his very first freelance gig. How? Because Jeremy had learned how to pitch projects to school administrators, who are not that different from corporate clients. He knew exactly how to speak their language, how to structure the proposal, and how to handle the project management. He used that experience that he gained to his advantage, and now his new freelance business is growing. On the other hand, there was another member who had joined the community but has since left, so I'm not going to bother naming them. Well, that person had jumped straight into freelancing after getting let go from their previous non-design related jobs. So they had never done graphic design or web design before, but decided when they got laid off that this is what I'm going to do, and they started freelancing. Well, that person struggled to charge more than $500 for a website because they didn't have that same foundation. No matter how much coaching they received from us, they just couldn't make it work, and eventually they gave up and left the community. The bottom line is this: working for someone else isn't just about paying your dues. It's about getting paid to learn the business side of design. And let me tell you, that knowledge is absolutely priceless when you eventually strike out on your own. I want to discuss something else that's absolutely crucial to your success as a designer: your network. And no, I'm not talking about your internet connection. I'm talking about the relationships you build that can make or break your freelance career. This reminds me of a conversation I had just last week with this other designer I know. He's been running his design business for well over a decade now, and he told me that he had just landed a massive rebranding project. And you know where it came from? It came from a former colleague of his from the agency where he used to work. Now, that former colleague, I guess, now works at some web design firm, and one of their clients was rebranding after a merger of some sorts, and he inquired about brand designers, and this former colleague thought of him. Now, that's not luck. That's the power of professional relationships at work. If he hadn't worked at that agency, he never would have received that referral. Here's the thing about working for someone else first. You're not just earning a paycheck, you're building what is very likely your future client pipeline. Every colleague, every client, every vendor that you work with, they're all potential clients or at least referral sources. And the best part, you're getting paid while you're building those connections. When you're working at an agency or an in-house design team, you're not just the person behind the computer pushing pixels. You're in client meetings. You're collaborating with marketing teams. You're working with printers. You're working with developers. Each of these interactions is like planting a seed that could grow into some future opportunity. When I decided to leave the print shop and start my own business, the first handful of clients I work with were all connections from my time at the print shop. These clients already knew the quality of my work, they trusted me, and best of all, since when I went on my own, I decided to charge the same rates as the print shop, there was no need to haggle or anything over prices. And now, 20 years later, after I left that print shop, I'm still receiving referrals that I can trace back to those days. Now, here's another aspect of working for others that's absolutely invaluable: learning to read client psychology. When you're in an agency environment, you get to observe how different types of clients think and behave. You learn to spot red flags that signal a problematic client. And you see how experienced professionals handle difficult conversations about budgets, timelines, and revisions, and so much more. I had this experience early in my career when I watched the print shop's project manager handle a particularly demanding client. The client wanted everything ASAP, but they kept changing the scope of the project. Now, instead of getting frustrated, my project manager turned this into a masterclass for me on how to deal with demanding clients. He taught me how to set boundaries professionally, how to manage expectations, and most importantly, how to turn scope creep into profitable project add-ons. He showed me that if the client wants to make changes, the client should be willing to pay extra for those changes. And you can't get this kind of experience from books or courses. Again, you need to be in the room when it happens. You need to see these interactions firsthand. And when you eventually go freelance, this knowledge becomes your secret weapon. A while back, one of our community members shared how she avoided a potential nightmare client because she recognized the same behavior patterns she had seen at her previous job. That's the kind of insight that can save you thousands of dollars and countless headaches. The relationships that you build during employment aren't just about getting clients either. They become your support network. Need a reliable printer for a rush job? Want to bounce ideas off someone? Looking for a developer to collaborate with? These connections become invaluable when you're running your own business. In this design world, it's not just about what you know, it's about who you know. And more importantly, it's about who knows you. And working for someone else first gives you the opportunity to build these relationships naturally, without the pressure of having to land clients to pay your bills, because you have a paycheck coming in. Now, speaking of paycheck, let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, money. Money is where working for someone else first really starts to make financial sense, and I'm going to show you why. One of the biggest mistakes I see new freelancers make is that they jump into freelancing without any financial cushion, forcing them to take on any project that comes their way, regardless of whether it's a good fit or not. They become what I call desperate designers, and trust me, clients can smell desperation from a mile away. Let me share another quick story. I got the job at the print shop straight out of school. Another classmate of mine, after unsuccessfully trying to find a job, decided to start his own design business. Now, I admit I was envious of him at the time because I thought he was living the dream of working for himself. However, a year later, he was designing logos for $50 just because he needed money to pay the rent. Now, around the same time, there was another designer that we knew who had graduated a few years before us. She started her own design business, but she had worked at a design agency for a couple of years between graduating and the time when we did. And now, while my classmate was barely scraping by on $50 logos, this other designer, who started her business at the same time, was pitching $2,000 branding packages, and she was getting them. Why? Because she had learned the real value of design work and how to communicate with clients, and had the confidence to charge accordingly. Confidence she gained while working for someone else. And here's what else working for someone else gives you. It's a safety net. I mentioned before, you get a steady paycheck, and usually you get some benefits to go along with it. And this is huge. The opportunity to build your freelance business on the side without the pressure of needing it to pay your bills, that's massive. That's how I did it. I started my design business in February of 2005, but I didn't actually leave the print shop until over a year later in May of 2006. I used the print shop as, let's call it, training wheels while I learned how to ride the freelance bike. I got my feet wet while relying on the paycheck from the print shop. Now, let's talk about something that nobody tells you when you're in design school, and that's the hidden cost of freelancing. When you're employed, your employer covers things like health insurance, software subscriptions, professional development, equipment and upgrades, retirement contributions, among a host of other things. But as a freelancer, all of that comes out of your pocket. And let me tell you, it adds up fast. When I started freelancing, I was shocked at how many expenses there were that I'd never had to think about before. But here's the really valuable part about working for someone else first. Like that former agency designer I told you about, you learn how to price your work properly and confidently to help you cover those expenses. There's not much expense-wise that a $50 logo project can cover, but a $2,000 branding project does help cover expenses and possibly more. By working for someone else, you see what clients are actually paying for design services. You understand project budgets, how to calculate overhead, and how to structure pricing for different types of projects. I remember watching the manager at my old job negotiate a $150,000 design and print project. The way he broke down the value proposition, the way he explained the phases of work, and the way he justified that investment to the client, it was like a masterclass in pricing. That knowledge is worth its weight in gold when you're running your own business. And here's an extra free tip from me. When you're employed, you can start building your freelance business strategically. You can be selective about the side projects you take on. You can focus on building a portfolio in your preferred niche. You don't have to take on every $50 logo project that comes your way just to keep the lights on. After all, would you rather spend your first year of freelancing scrambling to make ends meet, or start your freelance career with 6 to 12 months of living expenses saved up, a solid understanding of project pricing, a portfolio of well-paid work, and most importantly, the confidence to charge what you're worth? I know which option I'd choose if I had to start over. Now, let's talk about something that's really close to my heart, and that's professional growth and skill development. And I've got to tell you, this is where working for others really, really pays off. I know I keep saying that, but there's so much you can learn from working from somebody else. And this reminds me of yet another story from when I was first starting out. Gee, I'm full of stories today, aren't I? Well, maybe you can relate to this one. When I first started out, I thought I knew everything about design. I mean, I was cocky. I had the schooling behind me. I knew the terminology. I had the techniques down pat, and I had the skill to prove it. But my first few weeks at the print shop showed me just how much I didn't know about things like time management, talking to clients, managing expectations, and there was so much more. Now, that's not a bad thing. It was actually one of the most valuable experiences of my career. And let me break this down into two really important areas that you just can't replicate when you jump straight into freelancing. First, let's talk about project diversity. When you're working for an established business, especially a print shop or an agency, you get exposed to such a wide range of projects and industries. One week you might be working on a restaurant menu. The next week it's a corporate annual report. And the week after that, you're designing packaging for a new product line. This variety is absolutely priceless. Each project teaches you something new, introduces you to different challenges, and helps you develop problem-solving skills you didn't even know you needed. And yes, as a freelancer, you can work on a diverse variety of projects, but you're lacking the experience and the help that you gain from working within a team. I remember Keith, one of our community members, shared how his agency experience working with a team of professionals exposed him to enterprise-level clients and six-figure projects. Now, that kind of exposure is hard to get when you're starting out solo. Plus, since you're working for someone else, you're getting paid to learn those valuable skills, instead of paying for them yourself through trial and error as a freelancer. But here's the second part of that absolutely critical mentorship. It's having experienced designers looking over your shoulder, giving you feedback, showing you the rope. This is something you just can't put a price tag on. Let me share yet another quick story. When I first started at the print shop, the design department supervisor would always ask me one question whenever I showed her my design. Why? Why did you choose that color? Why that layout? Why that typeface? And I found it frustrating at first, but it taught me something invaluable. How you think strategically about design decisions and how to articulate those decisions to clients, because believe me, they will ask. And telling the client, I don't know why I did it, I thought it just looked cool, that just won't cut it. When you're freelancing alone, who's going to push you like that? Who's going to challenge your decisions and help you grow? Who's going to offer advice and possibly spark ideas that push your creativity in a whole new direction. Sure, you can join online communities like our amazing Resourceful Designer community, but it's not quite the same as having daily hands-on mentorship. Not just that, but working in a professional environment provides the opportunity to learn from everyone, not just designers. You learn from account managers about client relationships, project managers about workflows and timelines, developers about technical constraints, sales teams about how to pitch and present work. Each of these people is a mentor, teaching you different aspects of the business, and you don't get that experience working for yourself. And I know I mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. Working for others provides a safe space to fail. We all make mistakes, especially when we're learning. But when you're employed, these mistakes become learning opportunities rather than client-losing, reputation-damaging disasters. Every successful freelancer I know has a story about a project that went wrong and what they learned from it. The difference is, many of those freelancers learned these lessons while getting a steady paycheck, not while trying to build their freelance business. All right. Let's address the common objections that I hear from designers who are resistant to working for someone else. Trust me, I've heard all of them. The biggest one I hear all the time is, "But Mark, I want creative freedom." If that's what you're thinking, let me tell you something that might surprise you. The idea that freelancing equals complete creative freedom is one of the biggest myths in our industry. Here's a reality check. When you're a new freelancer desperate for work, you know what kind of creative freedom you typically get? The freedom to design exactly what your client wants, exactly the way they want it, because you can't afford to lose that client. You end up being more of an Adobe operator than a designer. Now, the irony is, when you're employed by a good agency or an in-house team, you often get more creative freedom because you have the support of an experienced creative team. You're working with bigger budgets. You have the confidence to push back on bad ideas. And most importantly, your paycheck doesn't depend on you making every single client happy. Now, another common objection I hear is, "I learn better by doing." Well, guess what? When you're employed, you are doing. You're just doing it with a safety net and mentorship. Think about it this way. Would you rather A, learn by making mistakes that cost you clients and money, or B, learn by making mistakes that become valuable teaching moments with experienced mentors? I remember when I was starting out, I made a pretty significant error while preparing files for print. But instead of it turning into a costly disaster, my print production manager caught the oversight before it went to print. He showed me where I went wrong, taught me how to prevent it from happening again, and that lesson saved me countless times in my freelance career when preparing files to send off to a printer. Now, here's another objection I hear often. "I don't need to work for someone else. I feel ready now." Let me be clear. Enthusiasm is great, but enthusiasm alone doesn't pay the bills. Being a successful design entrepreneur requires more than just design skills, or everybody would be doing it. It requires business acumen, client management skills, and professional judgment, all things that employment helps you develop. I said it at the beginning, but in case you forgot, I'll say it again. The designers who tend to build the most successful freelance businesses aren't usually the ones who jumped in right away. They're the ones who strategically use employment as a launching pad for their freelance career. Now, can you succeed as a freelancer without working for someone else first? Yes, you can. Many have done it. However, the learning curve will be much steeper, and determining what skills and what knowledge you're lacking can be challenging. Remember those statistics. 70 to 90% of freelancers fail in the first 5 years. Why not give yourself the best chance of success? Okay, I've talked ad nauseum about why working for someone else is the strategic first step to freelancing. Now we're going to get to the real practical stuff. How to know when you're ready to make the leap to freelancing, and how to do it the right way. You know, this reminds me of a story from episode 243 of Resourceful Designer, where I talked about learning to let go. Sometimes holding on to something too tightly like the security of a job, can actually hold you back. You should really go listen to that episode if you haven't already. But how do you know when you are ready? Well, let me break it down into a term that I just coined while I was preparing this episode, and that's the freelance readiness checklist. First, you should have a solid understanding of business operations. You should have a network of potential clients. You should have some savings. I recommend at least 6 months of living expenses. You should have basic business systems in place. And most importantly, you should have the confidence in your ability to price and deliver the work. Now, here's something really important about the transition from employed to freelancer. And I want you to heed this carefully. You don't have to do it all at once. In fact, I do recommend the bridge strategy, like what I used. Start freelancing while you're still employed. Remember what I said earlier about having training wheels on your business? You could begin by accepting small projects on the side, maybe working with 1 or 2 clients. This gives you a chance to test your systems, build your confidence, and start establishing your reputation without the pressure of needing to make a full-time income right away. I told you about Jeremy earlier and how he landed a $10,000 web project as his first freelance job. Well, Jeremy is actually still employed at that university. He's slowly building up his business and setting up his systems, taking on 1 or 2 projects at a time until he feels the time is right to take the leap to self-employment. Now, just be sure that you're not in a conflict of interest with your current employer if you're at an agency or something like that. When I started freelancing on the side, I had an agreement with the print shop that I would only do websites on my own, because if I was doing logos and business cards and brochures, I was actually competing with the print shop's design department where I worked. So until I left the print shop, I was only doing websites at home, and that's how I started off. So be careful about that conflict of interest, but otherwise, you're good. Now, here is a crucial point about systems. It's best to have them in place before you need them. You don't want to scramble at a last minute because there's something you're missing. Now, this includes a system for managing clients, a proper accounting system, contract templates, some sort of tool to manage projects. You should have a professional email address with a proper domain name attached to it, and of course a website. And there's a bunch of other things. Now, you can set up these systems using software like SuiteDash or Workflow Max or Pludio, which is what I use, although I don't use it entirely in the way it's supposed to be used. Or you can just do this old school using a spreadsheet or even a pencil and paper. The point is, there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to your systems you're going to use. But you need to find what works for you. But definitely have these in place before you start freelancing. And finally, here's the most important thing about transitioning from employee to freelancer. And I can't stress this enough. Maintain your professional relationships. Don't burn bridges when you leave your job, no matter how much you hated it. In fact, your employer might become your first client. I've seen this happen many times with designers. This happened to a few members of the resourceful designer community, in fact. The transition period is also the perfect time to build your business brand, set up your business legally if you want to, register the business, create your workflows and processes, to start building your emergency fund, because you'll want extra money to cover you during those downslides or slow times, and believe me, there will be slow times. And most importantly, you want to start raising your rates gradually. Remember, the goal isn't to escape employment. It's to set yourself up for sustainable success as a freelancer. Now, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I know this is typically a longer episode than I've done recently. And I want to wrap this up by addressing some questions I know many of you are probably thinking right now. First, what if I'm already freelancing without employment experience? Hey, that's okay. Remember, 10% to 30% of freelancers without prior work experience do succeed, and hopefully that's you. However, it's never too late to learn by working for someone. Consider taking on a part-time work at an agency. If that's not an option for you, you could try finding a mentor to help you. The resourceful designer community is a great place filled with mentors who can help guide you. Remember what I said earlier, it's not about letting go of your dreams, it's about building a stronger foundation for them. Another question I often get is, how long should I work for someone else before going freelance? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's not about time, it's about what you learn during that time and feeling prepared. Some designers might be ready after 2 years. Others may need 4 or 5. Heck, I worked at the print shop for 15 years before I went solo. Your mileage may vary. The key is to use that employment period strategically to build your skills, build your network, build your business acumen. Another thing I get asked is, what if there aren't any good employment opportunities in my area? Well, this is where you need to think creatively. Remote work is more common than ever. It's not exactly the same as working in an office, but you still get the experience of working with a team, people looking over your stuff. I know several designers who began their careers with remote positions at agencies. And don't dismiss in-house design positions. There are a lot of companies out there that have a design department inside that you may not even know about. They can be fantastic learning opportunities. My good friend Dan worked as an in-house designer for a pharmaceutical company before starting his own business. Now let me leave you with some specific actions you can take. 1, if you are currently employed, start documenting the processes and systems you see at work. These will be invaluable when you start your own business. 2, building your emergency fund now. Set aside a portion of each paycheck. If you're employed, this emergency fund is to help you cover expenses when you leave. And if you're freelancing, this emergency fund will help you get through those slow times I told you about. And again, trust me, there will be slow times. Even the most successful freelancers experience them. 3, start networking intentionally. Connect with colleagues and clients on LinkedIn, join professional organizations in your area. Remember, the more people who know who and what you do, the more successful you'll be. And 4, create a transition timeline with specific milestones you want to hit before going freelance. 5, and most importantly, join the Resourceful Designer community. The support and guidance you'll find in there is absolutely priceless. Speaking of the community, if you are finding value in these episodes, I want you to join us in the community at resourcefuldesigner.com/community. We have a fantastic group of designers at all different stages of their career, and we all support one another. We share resources, and we help each other grow. So don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you found this episode helpful, please leave me a review. It helps other designers know that this podcast is helpful and something they want to listen to. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Please send me a message at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com and let me know, did you or are you currently working for someone else before starting your freelance career? I'd love to hear from you. So that's it for now. I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your design business and reminding you to stay creative. Hey, well, would you look at that? You're still here. And the fact that you're still here means that you are a dedicated listener of Resourceful Designer, and I want to thank you for that dedication. Now, as a dedicated listener, you may know that I just changed the format of the podcast. I'm bringing back this show on the 10th anniversary of the date that I originally launched. September 30th, 2015 was the original launch date of Resourceful Designer. And now, after a bit of a hiatus, I'm bringing the show back. And with that, a new format to reflect the times that we're in. And that means doing away with the long intros that the podcast had for 345 episodes. And I must say, they were a lot of fun to do. It was great coming up with all those random facts for every episode about me and having my voiceover artist, Wayne Henderson from MediaVoiceovers.com, voice those for me. But unfortunately, that's coming to an end. However, the last time I placed an order with Wayne and he had gave me a batch of intros, I only used a few of them. And I still have over a dozen of them that were unused. So I thought, as a bonus for you, dedicated listener, I would throw in a kind of an Easter egg at the end of the next bunch of episodes until I run out. So every episode will have one of the intros from Wayne. So once again, thank you for listening, and here's that intro.
And now, your host. He refuses to go skiing, but is fine with snowboarding. Mark Decote.